Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. So this video will be continuing my wrap up of 2019, and in this video I'm going to be talking about some of my favourite books of 2019. This was actually really difficult to come up with this list because while I was fairly certain some of the books I wanted on the list, a lot of these books could have fitted more than one category, and I thought about several different ways of putting this video together. So you may remember last year I did a breakdown of sort of my bookish awards, different categories of books, and that's ultimately what I've ended up going for. I thought about doing a month by month thing where I picked my favourite book of each month, and then I realised 3 of my favourite books of the year I read in the same month, so that probably wouldn't work. So yeah, I've gone down the categories route. I have switched up the categories a little bit since last year and tried to talk about some maybe less well-known books that are favourites, ones that I've really enjoyed. Yeah, so let's just get on with the list, shall we? My first category is my favourite indie book, so that's a book from an independent publisher. My favourite, well, I had a number of books that I could have picked for this category, but the one I've gone for was from one of my favourite indie publishers, and this was a book I read in December. This is Children of the Cave by Virve Sammalkorpi. This is published by Priory Press, who specialise in translated fiction, particularly from European countries, although they do occasionally branch a little bit further east into Asia. This was by a Finnish author, so I have a subscription to Priory, and this is one of the books I received through that subscription. So I received it in December 2018, although I think it was officially released a few months after that. This was a brilliant book. It's written as the diaries of an explorer, a scientist who goes in search of a missing civilization and ends up finding actually a group of children who are outcast from society because they have animal attributes, whether that's fur on parts of their bodies or like animal snouts or animal ears or various different deformities that associate them with animals. So they have been outcast from their society and they now live in this cave. The novel is constructed as if it's excerpts from this explorer's diaries, and sections of it are lost and sections of it are undated and a bit appear a bit confused, and it's all woven together really well to make this brilliant narrative, and I was just absorbed. I read this really quickly. It was just, yeah, really cleverly written and raises some really good questions about what does it mean to be human, because the explorer Jax, I'm not quite sure how you meant to pronounce that, he is questioning who is more human, the children, these outcasts in the cave that he ultimately ends up trying to protect, or the group of ruffians that he is forced to associate with, who are the assistants to him and to the explorer he's working with on this expedition, who are more interested in what they can profit from the situation than actually the lives of these children. Really powerful and really enjoyable read, and definitely go check out Priory Press if you've not read anything from them, because they produce some really brilliant books. I have enjoyed every book I've read from them so far. The next category I have gone for is favourite new author. Again, I had a couple of options I could have gone for that, but ultimately settled on one because the other one is going to feature later. One of my favourite new authors of this year was Samantha Shannon, who wrote the Bone Season series. I've only read this one from that series so far still, but I also read The Priory of the Orange Tree back in March. I pre-ordered it and I read it pretty much as soon as I got it, within a couple of weeks of getting it. I've chosen to hold this one up because it is slightly lighter than the other one, but I really enjoyed both of these books that I read this year. Priory is an epic fantasy involving different types of dragons and a really well constructed world with different societies, different religions, different traditions, and sort of an East meets West. How do these different societies and people groups interact? The Bone Season is dystopian. It's a society where certain people have clairvoyancy, which are gifts that involve using their minds in different ways, whether that's telepathy or telling the future or that sort of thing, reading people's minds, and I just found it really absorbing. Really enjoyed this. Samantha Shannon is now an author for me. I have the other books in the Bone Season series. I need to catch up because the 4th one is coming out soon and I want to be up to date before that one comes out so that I can buy it and read it pretty soon after it comes out. The reason I ended up buying Priory was because of an administrative error that meant a load of pre-orders of it had been cancelled, and I'd been following Samantha Shannon on Twitter for a while, and when I saw that, I was just, how heartbreaking that must be for an author to put all this work into it and be relying on those pre-orders and then to have them all accidentally cancelled. So that was the moment that I decided I was going to pre-order it, and I'm so glad that I did, because, as I say, now one of my favourite authors and an auto-buy author for me. The next category I'm going for is my favourite borrowed book. So this would be a book that I borrowed either from the library. It is actually one I borrowed from the library, but I borrow a lot of books from friends and families as well. Again, this was another one that was really difficult to narrow down because a number of the books on this that have ended up on this list are ones that I borrowed, but in the end I've settled for The Poet X, which I read in April. I actually picked this one up because of Blackathon. It was the group book for Blackathon last year, and although I didn't manage to read it during February when Blackathon was running because I had to wait for it to come up for me on the reserves list, it was ultimately one that I really enjoyed, because even though the character was from a very different cultural background to me, I found a lot to relate to in that story and in that experience, and that was really powerful for me because it just goes to show that characters don't have to be exactly like you for you to find sympathy and empathy with them. I found that a really powerful book, and brilliantly written as well, because it was written in poetry rather than in a straightforward prose, so I just thought it was really cleverly, really beautifully written, and I want to read more of Elizabeth Acevedo's works, just haven't quite got around to it yet. Next on my list is my favourite translated book. Again, there were a few that could have been the winner for this, but ultimately I settled on Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This was one of my favourite books of the year, one that I've talked about a load. I filmed a full spoiler-free review for it, which I will link in the description box for you, so you can go and check that out if you haven't seen that already. It's actually my most viewed video on my channel at the moment, which is astounding because usually book reviews don't get that many views, but this has turned out to be a really popular review, so there we go. This is a really beautiful book. It's about a cafe which allows its clients to travel through time, but only within a certain set of rules, including that they must remain in the cafe within the seat. They can only talk to people that are in the cafe or have visited the cafe, and they have to return to the present before their cup of coffee gets cold. It explores a lot of themes of love and loss, and I just found it a really powerful story. It's quite short. Yeah, I thought it was really well written, really enjoyable, and a really lovely story. Apparently there is a film made of it as well, but I don't think that has been released in the UK yet. It's a Japanese bestseller, so hopefully at some point I'll be able to access the film to see how they've done that, because I'm really intrigued to see that. The next on my list is a favourite non-fiction book. So for this one I have gone for, you can't see that very well because of the light, An Interrupted Life, The Diary and Letters of Etty Hillesum. So Etty Hillesum was a Dutch Jew who lived during the time of the Second World War, kept a diary of her experiences living in Amsterdam, and then wrote letters from Westerbork transit camp, which is where she resided for a time before she and her family were deported to Auschwitz. A lot of Jews passed through Westerbork on their way to the termination camps, and this gave a really powerful insight into what life was like in that time for these people. It was really powerful. Etty Hillesum was a really skilled writer, and every so often I was reading it and would get lost in her language and her writing and then remember what happened to her, and it was quite heartbreaking. You can see how much I've tabbed it up as well, how much I took from this book. She wrote a lot about spirituality, about having faith even in dark times, and it just was a really, really powerful read. Yeah, so that was my favourite non-fiction. My favourite international book, again I had several that could fit this category that I've already mentioned, but in the end I opted for Lion by Saroo Brierly, because this is a truly international book. It takes place across several continents. It is a memoir of Saroo's experience of growing up in rural India, and then he gets separated from his family when on a train, and can't explain where he was from. He was around 5 at the time, and ended up in Calcutta, not able to explain where he came from or how he could get back there. So ultimately he was adopted by an Australian family and brought up in Australia, and then when he's an adult he starts to try and figure out, he remembers little bits of his childhood and starts trying to figure out where he's from and ultimately find his way back there. This was made into a film, so I did do a page-to-picture review comparing the book and the film. It's not spoiler free because I go into a lot of detail about the differences between the two media formats, but I will link that in the description for you as well if you want to check that out, if you've read the book or seen the film and want to know some of the similarities or differences, or if you don't mind about spoilers. The film was one of my favourite films the year it came out, and I still really love the film and really appreciate a lot of the choices they made in that film, but the book itself is really, really powerful. Yeah, it's a really beautiful read. It was originally published as A Long Way Home as well, in case you've heard of it in that format. Next we have my favourite anthology / collection. So to pick this one, I've looked back through poetry collections, short story collections, anything that's collected works, whether of an individual or a number of authors, and I have decided that On Anxiety, an anthology from Three of Cups Press, was my favourite in that category. I read this in December when I was starting to suffer from anxiety. I say starting, I've been dealing with anxiety for a lot of my adult life, but I have been going through a particularly bad spell of it recently. I'd had this book for a while and not got around to it, and decided to read it in December, and it just made me feel less alone in what I was going through. So it's a collection of essays, short stories, artwork, poetry from a number of different authors about their experiences of anxiety, and just really spoke to me. A lot of their experiences really resonated with me and with what I've been going through, and just really helped me to start to feel better. And that's an ongoing process for me, but this I think is a book that I will go back to a lot when I need that bit of a boost of feeling actually I'm not alone in what I'm going through. My next category is favourite series, and for this I've picked the Imperial Raj series by Leckie. So the first one is Ancillary Justice, and the second is Ancillary Sword, and the third is Ancillary Mercy. I can't remember what order they go in now. Anyway, so I read the first two books in 2019. I've actually finished the third book already this year, and I just really fell in love with this series, with Leckie's writing. She is a very skilled world builder. I know some people have found particularly the first book very confusing, and it is. So the first book follows, well, all the books actually follow Brett, who was formerly the AI of a large troop carrying spaceship called the Justice of Torin. And in this world, this empire, there are creatures called Ancillaries who were human occupants of worlds that the empire have overtaken, who are then essentially frozen until they're needed, and then are the consciousness of the AI is placed into the human body. So they are all linked to the ship that they are from. And at some point in the story, the Justice of Torin, the ship itself, has been destroyed, and only one ancillary body escaped, and that became Breck. So the first book covers her history up until the point where the story takes place, of her trying to figure out what happened, like why her ship was destroyed, and then it also tracks her progress from then to try and get her revenge for the situation she's found herself in. The second and third books continue on that story of the sort of outworking of what is happening within the Empire. It is confusing in places because the Ratch people don't recognise gender, so everyone is referred to as she, unless it's clearly pointed out to Breck that they are not female. So that makes it a little bit confusing. There's also a bit of confusion about the ancillary bodies all being the same person but also not the same person, and then the Lord of the Raj, Ananda Minai, is cloned, so there are lots of different Ananda Minai bodies who all to some extent share a connection and a consciousness, but yeah, it's confusing. It is confusing, I'll admit that, but I just really, because I really immersed myself in the world and what was going on in it, I found it easier to follow than I think some other people have. I just fell in love with the writing style. I really liked Breck as a character as well. I found her really relatable. I don't know what that says about me, that I found an AI really relatable. I suppose, well, in the later books it seems that, I'm assuming this was intentional, that Breck is on the ace spectrum, which it's very rare to find, or I found it quite hard to find characters who are ace. Yeah, so I really loved that series, and I'm going to be trying to get my hands on more of Ann Leckie's books. So there's another science fiction book she's written that takes place within the same world but with following different characters. So I want to read that, and she also has a fantasy novel out, which I didn't realise that had come out already, so I've got to try and get hold of that one as well. So she is also a new favourite author, and that was definitely my favourite series that I read, at least in part, last year. And then finally, my favourite overall book, and that's just because I had such a book hangover when I finished this book, and it's one that I keep thinking about, and I have actually started the next book in this series as well now, but my favourite book I've decided of last year was Truthwitch by Susan Dennard. So Susan Dennard is another new favourite author, partly due to Truthwitch, which I enjoyed so much, but also partly due to The Luminaries, which was her Choose Your Own Adventure story on Twitter, which hopefully one day will be an actual book as well, which I can't wait to read when it is. Truthwitch is the first book in the Witchland series. It follows Safi and Isolde, who Safi is a Truthwitch, which means she can distinguish when people are telling the truth or lying, and Isolde is a thread witch, which means she can see the links that connect different people. They find themselves on the run after a heist that has gone wrong. Also, Safi has had to keep her power secret because all of the different empires want to capture her. As soon as it becomes common knowledge that she's a truth witch, they all want her to be able to tell them when people are lying to them. It seems like it's a very powerful thing, but actually it doesn't work in the way that everyone thinks it was. Anyway, so they find themselves on the ship of Merrick, who is the prince of a small kingdom called New Brevna, and there's been peace in the land for 20 years due to a truce, but that truce is reaching the end of its time, and New Brevna is a small kingdom that is likely to become a war zone, really, in between the fight of all these other empires. So each of the characters have their own motivations, their own reasons for choosing what they do, and just the world building is so powerful. The magic system is so involved and so clever. And what I really loved about this book was that it's so fast paced. Although it was quite long, everything happened really quickly, so only after reading it that you realise how much action has taken place in such a short space of time in this book. It all fits into a couple of days, and there's so much development. I really loved the friendships within this book. So there's a really strong friendship between Safi and Isolde, who are thread sisters. They've been fighting alongside each other and supporting each other for so long. And then there's also Merrick's first mate Cullen, and they have a really strong bond, a really strong friendship as well. So it really explores that concept of what it means to be friends. There's so much drama and intrigue, and I just really love these books. I'm halfway through Wind Witch now, finally, and I have Sight Witch, which is a prequel, and Blood Witch, which are the other two books in the series that are out so far, so I'm really keen to read all of them. I'm not sure when the next book comes out. I hope it's not too long, because yeah, I just really love this series, love Susan Dennard's writing, and she has another series written as well, which I will probably pick up while I'm waiting for there to be more Witchlands books. I imagine myself rereading these books often. The first two books I've got from the library, so I will be buying my own copies of those. Anyway, that's probably enough rambling about that. That was some of my favourite books I read in 2019, broken down into categories, and as I say, a lot of those books could have fit a lot of different categories. It was quite hard to narrow it down. Let me know if you've read any of those books and what you thought of them, or what some of your favourite books of 2019 were. I'd love to hear from you, and if any of those are on my TBR, then they will be moved up, and I'll try to get to them sooner. Yeah, so please like this video if you liked it, and please subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also follow me on my social media. I'm on Twitter and I'm on Goodreads. That information will always be in the description box below. But for now, that's all for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!